The profession of engineering geology in this country is looked after on behalf of the Geological Society by the Engineering Group. The Engineering Group was founded in 1964, and its symbol is a profile of William Smith, the father of geology, the compiler of the map that changed the world, the first geological map of England and Wales. And if you ever get the chance to go down to Burlington House, perhaps you've gone into Fortnum and Mason's to buy your Christmas hamper, as all poor students should do. And just across the road is Burlington House, and in it you can see the first geological map of England and Wales. You can also see a facsimile of it on the BGS website. And what's amazing about that map, given that it was produced almost 200 years ago, is actually just how good it is. This bloke, who worked on canal excavation and construction, and travelled the country on foot, on horseback, and in a carriage, pretty much got the whole of southern England and much of Wales sorted. Pretty cool going, really. 1997, the Engineering Group established a medal and an associated lecture. And I've compiled here for you the papers that have been produced by the Glossop lecturers. Rudolf Glossop, after whom the sequence of lectures is named, worked in the Second World War as a geotechnical engineer. His main claim to fame in those days was constructing components of the Mulberry Harbour that was floated across the Channel and became one of the two mobile harbours that allowed the Allies to bring materiel and personnel into Normandy, that began the move towards the occupation of Berlin and the wiping out of Nazi Germany. Glossop pioneered the rapid interpretation of the ground in order to inform his construction. No rule books, no codes of practice, first principles of looking at the ground and designing on the back of that. He created the two most prestigious journals in the field: Geotechnique, the most prestigious journal of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and the Quarterly Journal of Engineering Geology and Hydrogeology, which is the Geological Society's journal. So Peter Fuchs talks about the geological model, the conceptual model of what the ground is like in terms of materials, masses, processes, the dynamic model which we want to go and interact with if we're going to build a tunnel, excavate a slope, construct a landfill, excavate a quarry. Now I'll just go through the sequence there because it gives you a feel of the breadth of disciplines and the breadth of science and engineering that is involved in engineering geology. Everett Hook, who was a mechanical engineer and became essentially the father of rock mechanics, he tried to quantify geology. Richard Chandler, a soil mechanic, worked in the group set up by John Burland at Imperial College. Have any of you guys been to Pisa? What's the most famous thing about Pisa, apart from pizza? There's a leaning tower, okay. And if you go to Pisa, you can find in the souvenir shops all sorts of trashy trinkets of leaning towers. One of the most gaudy ones is about 3 or 4 foot long, and it's kind of a red, bronzy, gaudy little thing. John Burland has one of these things in his office, and he's probably the only man in the world who can have it and not look gaudy. Because he's the man who's responsible for sorting out why the tower was leaning and how to then stabilise it. Chandler came out of that group, so he looked at the behaviour of fine soils, of silts and fine sands. Hutchinson, a geomorphologist, one of a quartet of people who 20, 30 years ago began to take the ideas of Embleton and others and apply them to coast protection, to road construction, to portal excavation. Dennis Brunsden, Professor of Geomorphology at King's College in the School of Geography. Again, one of the pioneers of taking geographers out into the field and mapping the dynamic processes of landfills, both in this country, mainly along the coast, and in other parts of the world like Brunei and Nepal and Papua New Guinea. Paul Marinos, a Greek engineering geologist whose speciality was tunnelling beneath Athens, a real hodgepodge of hard, ancient metamorphic rocks and thousands of years of cultural history. The metro in Athens was held back by over a decade, because every time they excavated, the archaeologists would have to come and spend a couple of years sorting out what it was they were going through. Martin Culshaw, now retired, one of the most senior geologists in the British Geological Survey down the road here, talking about the transition from maps to models. Many people associate geography with the study of topographic maps. And that may have been true 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. If you go down into the Edwards Resource Centre, you'll see the remnants of people's personal map collections. Increasingly, though, we're doing all that kind of work on a GIS. Ditto with geological modelling. Robin Fell, jumping through a generation or so, looking at landsliding in the dynamic environment of New Zealand. Mike de Freitas, probably the father of the teaching of engineering geology, who really embedded the idea, if you understood the geological history in the classical sense, then you've got an idea of what the engineering behaviour is going to be. And my own work, which looked at it from an environmental brownfield reuse perspective a couple of years ago, Rory Mortimer last year talked about chalk. If you want to know anything about the engineering properties or indeed the geological history of chalk, then it will be Mortimer's papers that you come across. And only a couple of weeks ago, the latest lecture was given by Eddie Bromhead on the residual shear strength of clays. So once a landslide has moved and you're looking at the shear surface, the strength of that material is fixed, is constant. And interestingly, next year's lecturer will be a lady called Ruth Allington. She'll be the first female Glossop lecturer, but more importantly, she comes from an outright geographical background. She studied geography at King's College. She then worked with Dennis Brunsden, and then has been practicing in industry for the last 30 years, and will be next year's Glossop lecturer. So a geographer finding their way to the very pinnacle of engineering geology practice in this country. This was from the introduction of my own Glossop lecture, and it gives you a bit of an idea of how you can get into construction and the applied side of the physical sciences. You guys are all embarked on that journey. So my first degree was in natural sciences. I definitely didn't want to do geology. I wanted to go and do physics, but there you go. History has a way of messing around with you. I worked for a year with the Geological Survey Department in Cyprus, followed that up with an MSc in Engineering Geology at Imperial, and then a part-time PhD while working at Wimpy. Not flipping hamburgers, you understand, but in the construction company. And then over the last, 17 years or so, been in academia, initially in a small research unit at Nottingham Trent University, and since '98 here at the University of Nottingham, initially in the engineering department, and over the last 5 or 6 years here in geography. My wife is a geography graduate from King's, and geographers and geologists have this sort of love-hate relationship, and since we've been married for 22 years, there's been plenty of loving and occasionally a little bit of hating. And we would go out into the field, and she would want to know what a rock was. So I'd tell her what it was. She'd say, why? And you've done this, have you done your rock description things? You're down in the Swillington lab, and you get this lump of grey rock, and you say, well, it looks like one. Why is it a limestone? Why is it a muddy limestone? Why is it a fine-grained sandstone? It looks like one. So can I encourage you in your professional careers, if you're actually involved on real sites, to get out of the office, get away from the computer, and go out and walk the ground and see the materials. This happens to be the places that I've worked in. David Price was the